Hey, Matt Wheeler. First of all,
Okay.
do the sock thing.
Do All right, I'll do the sock thing. Unfortunately, you guys are gonna get ones you've seen before, but it's probably been a while since you've seen these ones. Um, oh, and I had a pair. So I've told you about my son and how he steals my socks. I had a pair that I was gonna wear, and I'm like looking all over for them this morning, and I was like telling my wife, I was like, "Where are these socks?" And she goes, "Where do you think they are? Your son probably stole them." But so I grabbed a different pair, and these ones are little,
Oh,
what are they?
I think
Toucans?
it's parrots, aren't they? Or toucans? I don't know.
I don't know
It's a
the
bird,
difference,
but
if
yeah,
I'm
it's
being
those
honest.
colorful tropical birds.
It's a
So yeah.
color tropical bird. And I found that with the blue screen, green screen background we have going on, I can't lift my feet up and show my socks anymore. I have to just take my sock off.
So I've got my
Oh,
Dear Santa, I can explain.
ah, that fits you so well.
Oops. Yeah. Oh, that's recorded too. Darn. So
No, seriously, that fits you so well with your feisty attitude. I actually love it.
yeah. So I had the reindeers, I got the bulbs on, and I had the socks, but the
Oh my
we're
gosh,
foregoing the reindeer.
you
So
like
yeah.
legit went festive. That's
I didn't go with the ugly blue Christmas sweater. It's a little too warm in my office right now. But anyway,
oh, fair enough. I don't blame you.
yeah. So people here with us, do you have questions for Matt? Type them
Well,
in your
so
Q&A.
yeah, please jump in and start asking questions. That's really my favorite thing to do. But to be honest, I'm gonna jump in because of what your socks said. Dear Santa, I can explain. Um, and it's interesting to me as I'm working with couples. One of the biggest mistakes we make is that we try to explain.
Oh,
And it's funny because as I was it's as you wrote that sock out, it's imagine, and I don't know how everybody imagines Santa, but it's like I kind of see this jolly, friendly, because he's described as jolly, but friendly, caring, kind, fatherly individual. And the funny part is I think that he would say, "Hey, what happened? What happened this year, Tammy? What did you do? What was going on for you? Tell me what was going on." And as he asks you those questions, then you're like, "Well, I'll explain." Right? And a mistake that we make in our relationships is that we feel unheard, we feel misunderstood, and before the other person's even in a position to hear us, we are trying to explain, we are trying to backpedal, or not even necessarily backpedal, but like desperately to try to be understood so that the other person isn't upset, so the other person doesn't feel hurt, so the other person isn't rejecting us, whatever it is that we are nervous about. We go straight to explanation. And I try and teach this all the time. If you just slow down and start asking questions, or um, again, it's getting curious, like, "Hey, uh, I want," and I even encourage this. "I want to explain, but I don't want to, but I don't want to, because if I do, you're just going to hear me arguing. You're going to hear me being defensive." And so I try and encourage people, like, tell somebody you want to explain, and tell them that if I do explain, here's the impact it's going to have on you, rather than just going straight into explanation. Explanation really is a big relational mistake. We're far better off really getting the other person to ask us, "Can you explain?" And then us responding, "I am happy to explain," or "I'd really like to explain because that would help me feel understood or help me feel heard. I am nervous that if I explain, you might think I'm making excuses when I'm not actually making excuses." So these are some ways where we can actually feel heard and understood by each other, rather than going to the dreaded explanation before I've been asked of it. So Any thoughts or questions on that, Tammy? You're on mute.
That's because my puppy was barking. But yeah, I had twice today, which this is an unusual thing. I mean, I hear this regularly, but twice in one day where, the reason I acted out was I'm in a sexless marriage. And I'm like, I know that's the story you're telling yourself. That's the lie you're telling yourself. And that's what you're using to explain, well, I did all of this because of it. And that isn't, so I'm hopeful that these people get the help that they need to understand. But,
Well,
that's a level of explanation of well, but Matt, the reason I acted out was because all of these other things, it's not
right.
me, it's all these other things.
Well, and that usually tells me that somebody's really early in their recovery, right? Because
they aren't there yet. Yeah,
well,
on this one.
and in their mind, it's true. And you're going to be hard pressed to convince them otherwise, because they don't understand it. And in their mind, if we're talking about sexual compulsivity, for instance, in their mind, well, if I got more sex, then I'd be fine. And I wouldn't need this. And just so we're clear, a sexless marriage is 13 times or less in a year. But even then, where is that person's, and I'm not trying to shame anybody, but where is that person's accountability? Where is their will or their integrity that because I'm in a sexless marriage, I now have an excuse to go be unfaithful, or to whether I act out with another person or using pornography or whatever it might be. There are no excuses, right? You can say, here's the justifications I've used. Here's the stories that I've had to tell myself so that I could make these choices and not feel as bad about myself. And that's healthy accountability. So if you're explaining yourself and you say, look, I've used, I'm in a sexless marriage. I didn't know how to handle it. If I'm being honest, I'm probably in a sexless marriage because I don't know how to do connection very well. It might be because I'm rude. It might be because I'm mean. It might be because I'm a grown child who doesn't know how to get my needs met in healthy ways. And I ask you to try and take care of me in unhealthy ways. It could be because you're mean and I don't want to have sex with you, right? There's so many different, very legitimate reasons of why we might make an excuse or whatever. But the reality of it is we just need to take ownership and say, I made these choices because I wasn't happy. And even though those choices have harmed and damaged you terribly. So that's where we start getting into accountability, and rather than trying to explain or excuse ourselves. And accountability is amazing. When we learn how to do it in relationships, it is phenomenal and it's so healing. You can tell somebody the crappiest news ever, and if you're accountable, you actually build trust. You can go to somebody and say, I slipped up, I made a mistake, and I did this really dumb thing or this really unhealthy thing, and I know it's really hurting you, and that can actually bring you closer. Hopefully you guys are listening, ladies and gentlemen out there who need help with accountability. Listen to this. If you actually tell the truth and are accountable and don't make excuses for your behavior, you can actually build trust in the relationship. So very important. So yes, Tammy, I love that explanation.
Well, yeah. And your colleague, Debbie McCrae, who does the alternating Fridays, the last webinar I did with her, so not last week, but the end of November, she did one on accountability, and there were 10 points. She did a great job of talking it through. And, so there are resources like, what does accountability look like? We can help you. And I will put a link in the chat, but on our sexandrelationshiphealing.com site, for those of you that are just viewing this, under the resource tab is previously recorded webinars, and you'll see that. So there's a bunch of you don't have to figure this stuff out all out by yourself. There's, we have things to help. And I thought, like, when these people were talking about it, is like, what have you done to create trust so that your partner actually does want to have sex with you? And, but none of that was, I didn't bring up any of that at that moment, so.
A betrayed partner often might feel like, well, I'll be able to trust you when you never slip up again. And though that might be helpful, I've actually had plenty of people in recovery who have long bouts of sobriety and the trust doesn't shift. So sobriety in and of itself does not bring trust. Honesty brings trust. And so even if, and the fallacy that I'll get, well, but if I'm honest about a slip, he or she won't trust me. And I said, no, they're going to see that you're still struggling and that you haven't figured out what's going on in certain situations. But actually being honest about it will help them feel more secure in the relationship. We don't expect perfection in our relationships. So that honesty and accountability piece is so critical in the relationship. And I tell people, you have to be willing to hurt your spouse in order to be able to have trust and integrity in a relationship. Because if you're not willing to hurt your spouse, then you're going to lie about all sorts of dumb things. You both have to be willing to hurt each other, not intentionally trying to hurt each other, not trying to find ways to hurt each other, but the realization of me being able to say, you asked me to do this, I didn't do it. That must be really disappointing and break trust in me. And the person to be like, wow, yes, it does do that. Thank you for being honest, actually builds trust.
It does, because otherwise the behavior has always been, I've had to find out about it, and I've discovered this. And so you, and everybody, sometimes it's with disclosures and they withhold things. And I'm like, don't ever do a disclosure if you're not willing to be truthful, because the thing that you hold back is going to be found out and it's going to ruin everything, So it is about transparency, and what you said about we have to be willing to hurt, and to be honest, but no, there's no human being that is perfect. And so we have to accept our own humanity, and that we're not going to do things perfectly all the time. But if we're all striving for our best and we're willing to be honest, and be brave enough to go, I'm gonna put this out in front of you, and you might hurt me in my trying to, to bring this forward, but I have to be willing to trust, and just try,
Right.
I mean, that's what connection is. And that's what addicts fear, is that vulnerability. So
and that fear is what shows that you're being vulnerable, right? So taking that really scary part of yourself and sharing that with somebody, not knowing whether or not they're going to reject it, is actually giving you the opportunity to be closer. And yes. So even though it's terrifying, you got to do it. You got to start getting vulnerable about your fears and your worries and your concerns and your hurts and your longings. All of that builds that trust in the relationship.
So we've got some questions. I'm going to take the last one first, because it said, could you say more about addicts fearing vulnerability? And since you were just talking about that, let's start with that one, but we will get to the others. Don't worry.
I mean, the reality of it is most of us fear vulnerability, right? Like, and it's because vulnerability is risk. And many of you, if you've watched any of my previous, I did a webinar, I think it was Scott and I did one on boundaries a while back. If I were to guess, could have been a year and a half ago or so. And I was teaching about how I don't like the word boundaries personally. I'm not a fan of the word because it implies a barrier. I actually think that the healthiest relationships have the most boundaries, because boundaries are vulnerable. Boundaries are risky, because boundaries are about my need. And I think that early in recovery, a lot of people misunderstand boundaries and they misunderstand how to use them. But it's the best we know how. It's the best we know how is to start creating these very clumsy, clunky boundaries by asking somebody else to show up for us in a certain way. So, but addicts especially fear vulnerability because they have learned a coping mechanism to specifically hide that vulnerability and protect themselves from it. And so even think about this. Let's say I like to abuse alcohol, and so in order to ever get vulnerable, I might have to drink alcohol to let my defenses down. And so now I start to associate alcohol is the only way I can get vulnerable, but you're actually numbing your vulnerability when you drink alcohol, because you're not being your full real self, if that makes sense. So
it does, yes.
Let's say somebody learns to mask their vulnerability through a coping mechanism such as alcohol, sex, or whatever. What they learn then is, I'm going to, instead of being real, and ask somebody to comfort me, soothe me, show up for me, be vulnerable with me, risk with me, I'm going to reach to this coping mechanism. And somebody doesn't even need to be an addict to reach for a coping mechanism. If you've ever been around somebody that every time it gets vulnerable, it gets emotional, they crack a joke, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody, like, you hear somebody crack a joke every time it gets emotional, every time it gets sensitive, the movie gets emotional and somebody cracks a joke, it's their way of escaping the vulnerability because they don't want to feel or risk crying or whatever else. And so they crack a joke and, oh, everybody laughs, but at the same time, it's like you're missing the moments. You don't have to be an addict to fear vulnerability and develop an unhealthy coping mechanism, but you fear it because deep down inside, you're afraid that you won't be accepted or you will be seen as a failure. Deep down inside, someone else that you want to accept you, if they see who you really are, won't want it. So that's so much of that fear is present in somebody who's an addict, but it really is present in most of us. If I have a relationship with a partner who is struggling with addiction, I'm going to fear vulnerability, because if I give them vulnerability and they don't know how to handle it, and they make fun of it, or they end up, every time I start getting vulnerable and tell them about my fears, they end up drinking or using sex in an unhealthy way. Why am I going to be vulnerable with them? I'm not, because it turns out poorly every time. So fear of vulnerability, I think, is fairly universal. Hopefully that helps, though.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And, I talk often, like, yes, there's always the facade, there's compartmentalization, but it's because, addicts, and it doesn't matter whether it's an alcoholic or a sex addict, whatever form it takes. But, we learned at an early age that there wasn't bandwidth for us to have, safe emotions. Like, in a perfect world, everybody would be nurtured in a real and meaningful way so that they're okay with, testing out that vulnerability. But, when for whatever reason, and there's so many of them, you grow up learning that you better not have needs, or it's not okay, like you said, the cracking the jokes, it's like, okay, that's not tolerated, so we have to be funny, or our family never has problems, or whatever it is, these facades that we have to put on. So there's always that scary stuff, that those, the numbing out, the escape, the whatever is covering up. So we can learn in recovery to take those brave steps. There's a lot of people that are abstinent that don't ever learn that. So when people go, yeah, I've been in recovery for, like, no, recovery is you change things. You are willing to take, you are living in, you're living in the solution, not the problem.
Right.
It's different.
When people say, oh, I've been in recovery for 20 years, and I really start to talk to them, my thought is, no, you've been sober for 20 years. But you're still avoiding, you're still keeping yourself from getting vulnerable. You're still preventing yourself from digging down deep to figure out what are the foundational issues that I have. So yeah, no, it's a scary thing. That's why it's vulnerable.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, I always say if I could wave a magic wand and people could see what it would be like, kind of like, the ghost of Christmas future or whatever, like
Yeah.
whatever, I mean, if you, all these Christmas theme, but, like, if you could see what it could be if you were willing,
Oh yeah.
like everybody be going, yeah, I want that and I'm willing to do the work. But, we get so caught up in the, in fear, and, that it's hard to be willing to take that
Well,
risk, and a lot of brokenness.
when you get past vulnerability, you get to intimacy. And intimacy is that place where I feel safe and trusted, and that somebody can hold my space, that they can love me and see me for who I am, even if they don't agree with me. In the intimate space, you also have healthy sexuality, which is very vulnerable, and such a good bonding experience when it's used properly. And so, but that getting past vulnerability, getting past our fears, is that space that all of us really want, which is inner peace with someone else. And it feels wonderful, but it's terrifyingly difficult to figure out how bad we are at it.
Yeah, yeah, but we can learn. So,
Oh yeah.
okay, we're going to go back to the first question, which is great. This is our first webinar. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good job
Could
showing
you do
up.
an overview of Prodependence and how to use it? So, there's a little small question for you.
No, for sure. So Dr. Rob coined the term prodependency or prodependence. It is basically to counteract, there you go, there's the book. To counteract, many years ago, some wonderful books were written by Melanie Beatty and Pia Melody.
Pia Melody and Claudia Black.
Oh, wasn't it Melanie Beatty? Didn't she also do Codependent No More?
She did, yeah, but I think Claudia, regardless, it's in the history of all of this. Yeah, Claudia Black was one of the three too. Yeah,
yeah. Claudia Black too. And you know what? The work that they were doing and what they were trying to figure out back then was absolutely amazing and helped so many people. But over time, we've gained an understanding that it could carry with it a very shame-filled message. And the shame-filled message to a betrayed partner could very much be heard as, you wouldn't have married somebody like this unless you were as broken as they are. And so the idea was, you're just as sick, you're just as broken. And so a lot of people in recovery, those concepts taught within codependency were very helpful at the time and helped people get clear and help people get healthy. But for some people, it was also very shaming and very almost like, well, I guess I deserve to be with the person that I'm with. And I guess I deserve the bad things that have happened to me. And they could take it in a really unhealthy way. And Dr. Rob basically kind of got in there and said, this isn't healthy. Like, you can't love someone too much. You can't, I'm trying to think of how else he describes it, right? You can't be too attached to somebody because you love them, but we can have unhealthy behaviors because of our desire to try and love and connect with somebody. But there's nothing wrong with you because you're trying, even if you do it in an unhealthy way. And so Dr. Rob very much was like, let's start trying to figure out what are our unhealthy ways that may not be beneficial in a relationship. And let's see how even our unhealthy behaviors show how much we want healthy dependence, or as Rob calls it, prodependence. And so there's a couple of ways. Stephen Covey refers to it as interdependence. Rob Weiss refers it as prodependence. Within the EFT, emotionally focused couples therapy world, it's referred to as effective as opposed to ineffective, right? It's effective dependence. And so it's this idea that having dependence on each other is actually how our brains are hardwired. We want dependence on each other. We need dependence on each other, but we've got to figure out what a healthy dependence looks like. And so it's not my job to go out and buy the alcohol for my addicted partner just to keep them calm, right? That would be an unhealthy dependence. But at the same time, because I'm trying to encourage them to get treatment, or I'm getting healthy treatment so that I can have healthier boundaries, or because I'm sticking with them and I'm not kicking them out on the street, that doesn't mean that I am now codependent and unhealthy about my dependence. What we want to do is figure out a healthy dependence or a healthy prodependence, which is, how do I get myself healthy, love myself? And just because I stay with somebody who's unhealthy in their behavior doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. I'm in it for now. I'm in it as long as I choose to be in it. And I'm a good, lovable, healthy person who's trying to figure out how to get healthier. While I have patience and compassion for my partner or a family member who is trying to figure out how to recover. So I hope that's a pretty good synopsis. I imagine Tammy could easily have some more to throw in there.
Well, Dr. Rob uses the interdependence too, because like we in this country in particular are like, we need to be independent, and like, no, we really need to be healthy, connected. And using your alcohol analogy, he uses one of the examples of, I'm a spouse, and I need my husband to get to work, and I need my husband to pick up the kids and not drive drunk with them. So I say, if I will have a bottle for you at 4:00 every day if you just do these things, and that was a solution to prevent drunk driving and to make sure he went to work. Now, will he hold that boundary? Probably not. But so is there a better way to do it? Possibly. But at least, like Dr. Rob would say, gosh, that was I can see how much you care. You're working, who's got a roadmap for all of this stuff?
There's a positive attempt at attachment and safety in the relationship, even in the unhealthy choices we make. So we're not broken because we made unhealthy choices. We were actually trying to promote attachment and safety and connection in the relationship. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. And he would say, that was so great. You're so creative. Now let's see if there's another way we can look at this. But, the codependence of like, you're part of the problem, you're an enabler, and let's look at your family of origin. You're going like, my house is burning down. I'm just trying to figure this out, and so he did his whole, that book is really, came out of his dissertation on, on this. He did a lot of research. The codependence has never made it into the DSM, and they tried really, really hard, and there are unhealthy, you can love somebody who can't love you back. You can love somebody. I mean, there are things that doesn't mean loving them is, that there's something wrong with you for loving them. So, but so it really shifts the lens of like, gosh, you love somebody who's broken. How can we support you without blaming you and get help? Unfortunately, too many people still use that codependent term. And then the other aspect of this is partners go to a therapist, a well-meaning therapist, and they get told it's part of their problem. They don't go back. And so they don't get the support that they need, and that's tragic, because this is hard stuff,
Prodependence is all about trying to break the stigma that loving someone is unhealthy, and that doing your best to try and help them improve is unhealthy. And how it's applied, we're actually trying to talk about it here, right? Application is the difficult part.
Yes.
So that probably leads us into
Yes. I'm reading this. I was like, so the next question is, keep your questions coming. I made a request for a clear boundary with my spouse a year ago. Today, he asked me how I would feel if he crossed that very clear requested boundary. And just him asking me triggered me. I see that I am dysregulated, and I asked him to go look at why he thinks even asking to cross a boundary would be okay. I feel like we have backtracked. Can you tell me how to deal with when he pushes back on my boundaries? I get triggered. How to get him to think about what he is asking for when it is clearly crossing a boundary. I know I can only control myself. I told him to do what he wants, but I will keep myself safe. That makes me feel like we have made no progress. I'm glad you're bringing this here, but I'm so sorry that you feel so hopeless,
Yeah. So this is so there's a couple of things that come up for me. It's not that you need to share this, but let me talk about some of the difficulty around boundaries is that I don't know what the boundary is. And so it's hard for me to know or to dive into the specifics, but there's lots of really good stuff we can talk about here. And so you're getting dysregulated and asked him to go look at why he thinks even asking to cross the boundary would be okay. And you feel like you've backtracked. But I wonder if him asking about the boundary is, or if he can cross it, is opening up an opportunity for you guys to have a vulnerable conversation around why that boundary is so important to you, or why he even feels the need to cross the boundary. And I use a lot of really, for lack of a better way of saying it, I've used a lot of dumb examples on here. I've had people, I had once or twice somebody say, you're using examples that don't even come close to relating to betrayal trauma. And I try to use it to give an idea of like what boundaries look like, right? And so one of the examples I've used before is that so many years ago, my wife told me that she didn't want me to use her loofah in the shower. And it's such a silly example, but at the same time, if you think about it, it wasn't to my wife. When she asked me not to, she was vulnerable. She was afraid she was going to hurt my feelings, right? And at the time, it did hurt my feelings. I'm like, what in the world is she to? Why does that even matter? You know, for all different reasons, I couldn't understand it. But when somebody gives us a boundary, it gives us an opportunity to find out more about them. And so him asking the question if he can cross it also gives, I mean, one part of me is like, good for him for asking rather than just doing it. So many people just cross boundaries without ever even asking. So part of me says, man, I want to know why. I think it's good you're asking. Why do you think it's okay to ask that? But have you backtracked if he's actually asking that question? Is there a possible positive thing that could be there? And if so, man, what is it that makes you think asking would be okay? The other thing is, I would want to know, does he recognize the impact that crossing that boundary would have on you? One mistake that we make as couples is we place too much importance on our intent. We want to argue our intent. I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to help. My intention in crossing that boundary was actually to show you I love you. And it's like, forget intent. Just focus on the impact. Spend time understanding, when I cross this boundary, how does it impact you? What message does it send to you? So I think you have every right to get triggered. You have every right to feel like you backtracked. I want to understand, what about that, him asking to cross that boundary feels so much like a backtrack. Like he needs to know the impact that it's going to have on me. He shouldn't have to ask. It just makes me curious. I like that you recognize you can only control yourself. It's interesting because the reality of it is that you said, I told him he can do what he wants, but I'll keep myself safe. I guess it would depend on the boundary. If I tell somebody this is my need, right? Like, I'm just trying to pull it back to the example of my wife when she said, I need to use, or like, don't use my loofah. And if I say, I'm going to use it anyway, well, then she's most likely going to say, okay, I guess I'm going to have to grab a loofah, only bring it in the shower, put it somewhere else so that it's not accessible. I mean, it's ultimately, she then has to alter her behavior in order to get her need met. And so it makes me wonder, what boundary could he cross that you can still keep yourself safe? If he's crossing a boundary, he's violating your need. So I guess I would need to try and understand that better. But I can hear that the sadness that's coming up, that you don't feel like you've made progress. Maybe you guys haven't, or maybe you guys have made progress in other areas and you're just shocked that this area still has a lot of room for growth. And my guess is boundaries is a conversation that you guys need to start talking more about, because maybe there's a misunderstanding of boundaries. I find that people get frustrated with boundaries. If I was in a healthy relationship, we wouldn't have any boundaries. And what I suggest is the healthiest relationship has the most boundaries, because boundaries are needs. And if I'm in a healthy relationship, I want to know all of your needs. I want to know every need you have. So if Tammy says to me, hey, Matt, I've been thinking about it. When I do webinars with you, you don't have as well of a defined topic as Debbie. And so it's scary for me. Like, oh gosh, what are we going to talk about? If Matt's not prepared, I'm really nervous. And so my anxiety goes up. And so if Tammy says to me, hey, I would love it if when you give webinars, you have really defined topics and I know what we're diving into, and man, if you could send those to me, that would be great. And so now I'm understanding that in order for Tammy and I to have the best synergy in our webinars, she really needs me to show her what we're diving into as a topic. And then I have to decide, can I provide that for her? And whether or not I can provide it for her is up to me, but it's also going to affect her one way or the other. I'm either going to impact her positively and she's going to go, oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is so helpful. Or I'm going to do something in between where I give her maybe not quite as much as she wants, but it feels better. And she's going to be like, well, that's good. I feel like you care about me. Or I'm going to say, Tammy, we're going to figure it out. And as scary as it is, we're just going to have to do this together. Or she's going to say, I can't do it. Scott, if Matt can't prepare a topic, he's yours, right? And so if you see how a boundary could work there based on the needs of each other, and if you will, the consequences that come. But Tammy's not giving me a consequence to try and punish me. Tammy's giving me a consequence because it's my need relating to her need, and we figure it out together. And so this is some of the issues that people have around boundaries, is they don't understand that they're all about needs and need fulfillment with each other. You know, Tammy can't say, I gave you a boundary that you have to have all of your topics prepared 3 months ahead of time. And I say, I can't do that. Well, you crossed my boundary. Well, no, I understand that I haven't met your need, and I don't blame you for being uncomfortable. What do we need to do? And if she's like, well, I can't do the webinar. Okay. Like, I can appreciate that. And so then we've got to decide, does this relationship work in this way? Now, I use this as maybe a silly example, but I actually don't think it's silly at all. Tammy might have this need. I might get an email from her, which to me, no, I'd be excited.
I do not, just to clarify. Yeah, I don't like, I'm really good at just rolling with things. Oh, yeah. I love doing these with you. So it's all good. No. We're good, but it is a great example of like, you know, like that is, you know, it's like, oh, if I was sitting here highly anxious of like, oh my gosh, there isn't, I mean, like that. No, I mean, and
I wouldn't want you to feel that way. That would make me feel really sad. And because I care about you, even if I'm not excited to do all that prep work, let's say, right? Because then I would most likely do it because I want to maintain the relationship. That's what makes boundaries beautiful, is that I want to do it. I want to show up for you so that we can have the relationship. But if it's too much of a burden on me, then we've got to figure out, then what is this going to look like? Right. And this is where boundaries become this amazing thing. Instead of Tammy trying to control me, it becomes this, no, this is actually strengthening our relationship because we understand each other better. Boundaries are never about controlling the other person. It's about creating a relationship where we are more vulnerable and we understand each other better, and we risk with each other to strengthen what we do together. So I am not entirely sure if that was the tangent you
Well,
needed.
she has a follow-up, and so I'm going to read the follow-up, and I've got some thoughts on it too. So follow-up, maybe we haven't backtracked and we have made some progress, and that's a great awareness, and hopefully
Yeah.
that gives you some hope. He betrayed me with this specific boundary in the past, and so I have made it clear that I'm not okay with it. I have asked him to look at why he thinks this is okay. He knows clearly that this was a betrayal, and for him to ask if this is okay now, no, it never will be okay with me. It looks like he is thinking my boundary will change for some reason. It won't for me ever.
Right. And so that's an amazing thing. Let's have a conversation like that this is an immovable boundary for me. Now, you have to decide as a person, like how immovable is this, right? And there are some people, because I'm in the sexual compulsivity world, let's say somebody says, if you ever relapse with a prostitute, I'm done. And I've heard people say that, and yet it happens and they're able to work through it. And I've heard people say that and it happens and it truly is the end. And in the moment, you're setting a boundary because it's your way of trying to communicate what a no-go this is, right? But the truth is, when the boundary actually gets crossed is the moment that we actually have to deal with what is my real need. One of the mistakes we often make is that we say, well, I said that I would do this, now I have to. That's not true. You said that because you were trying to describe your best understanding at the time of what your need would be, but maybe things have changed. Maybe you're able to work through something differently. And so don't ever force yourself to hold to a consequence that doesn't feel right now just because you said something in the past. But this to me looks like you are recognizing this is a no-go. So then let's have a conversation why you might think that would change. What need is coming up for you, husband, that you think this boundary, if it never changes, you're going to have a deficit? What deficit is that going to, that you're going to either have to learn to live with or find another way to fulfill, because this is never changing with me? That's great. What a wonderful opportunity to have that conversation. That doesn't sound like backtracking it to me at all. It sounds painful because you're now realizing he doesn't understand you as well as you thought. But that's a wonderful realization to come to, because now you can walk through the conversation and understand each other better. And hopefully he asks you a lot of questions and gets to know you better. But
And I was thinking the same thing, but I was thinking I really do like the conversation of like, I'm curious what that means for you. Why are you bringing this up now? What is it you're looking for with this boundary, to shift, like you said, what is the deficit to you versus this is my trust? Like, to me, that would be the most primary thing. So what is it that you think you're going to gain over here that you're going to lose, if you cross it? The other thing, and this is a negative thought, and I don't know, but I was like, I wonder when I first read this, if he was testing the waters of like, if I cross this boundary, like how much trouble am I going to be? I don't know that he's doing that, but like if he's testing the waters, and if you have a really hard edge boundary, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but like if you cross this boundary, I'm out of here, like, I don't know if he's looking for somewhere. I don't know, but neither do you. So perhaps, first of all, an addict going and thinking about something is like them going and talking to their sponsor, them going and talking to their therapist is a good choice. The space between our ears is, not a great space. So you having a conversation of like, I'm going to, it's hurtful to me that you are bringing this up, but I need to be curious. I'm going to stay in this conversation, and I want to understand what this means to you. What are you looking for? And then I'm going to share with you why it's so important to me. That's huge progress. But again, what I see is that you're at least dialoguing about this, and that's much better than him going and acting out, completely not telling you about it. So
it's hard because this is one of those situations where I wouldn't blame a betrayed partner for feeling hurt by this coming up.
Yes.
Because it's kind of a shock to your system that, oh my gosh, this is even being thought about. At the same time, it actually shows a tremendous amount of vulnerability on his part to even have this conversation. Because one of the mistakes that recovering addicts make is this belief that I'm not allowed to have wants, I'm not allowed to have needs, I've done so much to hurt my partner that I'm not allowed to have my own boundaries. And it's such an unhealthy mistake that they make there, because their needs, their vulnerabilities are just as important as their partner. And so this to me looks like a really cool opportunity for vulnerability and connection, but I don't blame you one bit for being hurt by it.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you were talking about boundaries. So I know with this one, December 3rd of last year, Gavin Sharp did a webinar on why addicts need healthy boundaries. And in it, he said, we all need healthy boundaries. And I was like, well, of course we do. And I often, we talk so much about healthy boundaries for partners, but I was like, yes, we all need healthy boundaries. If you were as adamant about the loofah as your wife, you would want her to respect your loofah use as well.
Totally.
So, I mean, but it's really important to, to have that under, but if we care about each other, we want to understand, like, tell me what the loofah means to you. I mean, it's like one of those things, like it's
right.
Dead skin cells and I don't want yours on me. I mean, I get it,
Exactly. And so it's kind of there were several things in there early on in recovery, because betrayed partners often are so bad at having their own needs and wants because they've been so damaged by a boundaryless, unhealthy individual. I'm trying.
Yes.
Okay. Is that okay the way I
Who
said
shall
that?
remain nameless? Yeah. Yeah.
That early in recovery, oftentimes clinicians will focus on the betrayed partner and like drilling in, you need to have boundaries, you need to have boundaries. And a lot of times that betrayed partner will get this idea of, and this wonderful empowerment that needs to happen. Like, you are allowed to have needs, you are allowed to, but it then can morph into, well, then fine, I now feel empowered, I'm going to control you. And then the partner struggling with the addiction is like, well, shoot, if this is what recovery looks like, then I guess I need to do this. And they feel super controlled, but I'm not allowed to have a voice or have needs. And so it starts creating these unhealthy dynamics. But I've gotten to a place where it's like, early in recovery, it's just kind of part of that growth process. And if there were a way I could figure out how to teach people how to do healthy boundaries without being controlling, and how to do respecting boundaries without being passive, I don't know the best way to say that. I would love to be able to figure it out. Maybe that's the book I need to be writing, but it is a difficult part of that process. We do need to learn, if we're a recovering addict or if we're a recovering betrayed partner, we have to learn that needs that we both have are valid and important, even if those needs are misappropriated. Like, if you have somebody recovering from sexual compulsivity and they're reaching to their spouse saying, I want to be sexual, and the betrayed partner is like, don't use me as an object. Well, just the act of your spouse asking you to be sexual or flirting with you to be sexual is super vulnerable. And that is really shows progress, that they're not going and acting out. They're coming to you with their vulnerability. Even if they're placing an overemphasis on sex in the relationship, which could be unhealthy, they're still saying, I need you. It doesn't mean you need to be sexual if you're not in a space where you feel you can do that and respect yourself and respect the relationship. But I'm trying to use that as an example, like learning how to have needs and that you both have them, even if you don't understand them, is progress in the relationship.
And yes, and you won't do it perfectly, neither of you. Like,
you're gonna be
and
a mess.
A lot of boundaries do, like, there are some hard edge, like we were talking about, there are some hard no-go boundaries. And then there's other ones that you go, okay, I see that this person is making progress, so I'm willing to trust a little bit more. And, but it really is on a boundary by boundary, case by case basis. And there's no, I think it's one of the hardest things, and you need to write a book, but it's because, your boundaries and my boundaries, are different. And how do we navigate that space? And, it isn't like, well, you do these 10 things, these are everyone's boundaries and everybody needs the exact same thing. We all need, caring and support, and, we need like there's some basic things. We need physical safety, and emotional safety, but we can't always get that from our primary person, but
Right.
then hopefully we're creating that safety net with other people. But they can shift, but it usually is because trust has been built, but yeah, for someone with chemical dependency, like my hard boundary for my sobriety is like, I'm never going to, no, for today, I'm not going to drink or use,
I love
chemicals. Yes,
for today.
But that is my boundary of,
Right.
that defines my, that aspect of my sobriety. There's more because of course, I'm a multi-winner. But anyway, but it's one of those things where, that is really key, to understanding that. So that boundary will not change. That defines that. But
Yeah.
there's other things that, that can, change, for, with food addiction, with any of the process, things are different. It's not the same. And, for a boundary for, 90 days of, and I'm just making this up, there's no rewiring magically of the brain, but, if it's a 90 days of abstinence, well, that's a boundary for 90 days, but then it shifts. So
Right.
that's one of those things that can shift. It can be, we're going to go another 30 days or whatever. So again, there's an opportunity for conversation of what do we need? Here's where we are right now. What do we need now? And then we can reevaluate it, and some of them are like, this is going to be forever, but today is enough. This is my boundary today, and, and it will be tomorrow and the next day too. But
Yep, absolutely. It's so funny when you're like, I'm a multiple winner. I thought, oh, did little Tammy hit the addiction jackpot? Because that's what it sounded like. Oh, that little girl hit the
yeah,
addiction jackpot, and you had to go
yes,
back
I did, but
teach her how to do it
but one
otherwise.
day at a time. I have a
One day.
daily reprieve, and I'm grateful. So,
Yeah, for
so the
sure.
next one is also about boundaries. So today's apparently a boundary day.
Boundary
So, is there
day.
a reasonable time frame? Best way for a partner to expect the addict to let a partner know about having crossed a boundary, such as downloading an app that they agreed against, flirting online, etc. So it sounds like early in the
Yeah.
process, and
This
like,
is
what is reasonable for me to expect him to change?
This is a multifaceted question that actually will dive into boundaries even more. And I'll start with a little history. When I first started doing addiction work, at the time, it was generally accepted that somebody had 24 hours to check in a slip. And I don't remember exactly why, but as I was doing my CSAT, my certified sex addiction therapy training, it had been updated, and I don't know if it was current research, I can't remember exactly, to 12 hours. And I think it's actually healthier to do 12 hours because the longer amount of time that you have to not check it in, the more amount of time that you have to justify why it's not necessary. Oh, well, it wasn't that bad, and maybe if I'd done this, and she's stressed out anyway, and I don't want to burden her, and I'll just check it in with somebody else, right? And so 12 hours, I think, can be very, very good to just put it within, let's do this as quickly as possible. However, and this is the big however, if the betrayed partner says, I need you to do it within 12 hours, but I need you to do it face to face. Well, then we need to have a conversation. Okay, you need me to do it face to face, but you need me to do it within 12 hours. So if it happens at 7 o'clock when I'm at work, and by the time I get home, you're asleep, and then you're getting kids off to school and I go back to work, right? Or whatever, right? I'm going to miss that 12-hour window. Do you want me to call you? Do you want me to text you? Do you want to do a video call? Should I leave a video message for you? Like, I will do it within 12 hours, as terrifying as it is. But if for some reason it's not working, what's an alternative method that I can do it that's not face-to-face? And you might say, no, I need it face-to-face. Let's do 24 hours, right? So then we start having conversations around what are my needs in slip disclosure or boundary crossing disclosures, right? And what are you and what are your needs? And let's figure out what works best. So to put it simply, 12 hours is what I tell people. That's the rule. You got 12 hours to check it in order to maintain healthy recovery. There is some nuance there depending on the betrayed partner's particular need. And that each one of you just kind of has to decide what works best for you there.
And I'm going to take a little different, all of that is true, but it's also one of those, if somebody's new in recovery and you're discovering this stuff and they're not reporting it, like if you're looking for about how long is it going to take for him to get a clue that he needs to stop doing those things and tell me, it's hard. Like early recovery, it is just plain hard because an addict has the go-to behaviors of the problematic behavior, hasn't learned enough tools to really, have that solid foundation yet. And so there's a lot of mess. And so my thought was the faster they are, the more engaged they are in the recovery process. And it isn't just like I'm reading a book. I mean, because if everybody could read a book and be done, we'd all be healthy really fast. We do the audio version, we do the cliff notes because that's what we would do as addicts, but that's not how it works. We're talking about healthy connections. Matt talked about that earlier. It's healthy connections, so it is, so getting a sponsor, working the steps. I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about they were in long-term, I'm going to say abstinence, because they did steps 1, 2, and 3, and then they skipped to 12, and they skipped 4 through 11, but 4 through 9 are really where the meat of the program is. If you're doing 12-step work, and there's other methods, but it really is where we learn, how to do life differently. It's where we get the tools to show up in a different way. So the more engaged we are in the recovery process, the faster we'll get the tools, and they won't just be sitting at our feet. We'll actually pick them up and know what to do with them, and we'll have peers to ask for help. Like, what do I need to do? And so that accountability that we talked about at the beginning too, that is accountability with our sponsor, with our therapist, with our partners on a different level, but so showing up and saying, I downloaded that app. I know that was against what we agreed. I've deleted it. I've called my sponsor. I'm meeting with my sponsor tomorrow. I've reached out with my qualified therapist, and I've got another appointment scheduled. Here's what I'm doing. And that will help a partner go, oh, okay, I don't love the slip, but wow, that's really different. And that person is moving forward in a different way. You having to find out about it, you discovering it because you saw the phone and saw the app, that's not okay. And that's not, never will build trust.
Yeah, that's not disclosing a boundary. If you find it, that's catching them in
acting out.
Yeah, acting out. I mean, in their relapse or in their slip or whatever. Like, yeah, they, in order for it to be healthy and to build trust, they have to disclose. Catching somebody is never disclosure, and it doesn't build trust. In fact, it weakens it, right? So no, I love that, Tammy.
We are out of time. Thank you, Matt. It was great to see you. Watch the schedule. It's December, and so there's going to be some schedule changes. So make sure you're checking the calendar, the events on sex and relationship healing. We'll do our best to keep the calendar updated so you can track what's going on. But there's lots of drop-in groups and webinars throughout the rest of the month, and then into 2023. So
yeah. Exciting.
Crazy. Yeah.
Good job, everybody, and be as healthy as you can.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
See ya.